Chapter 20, 1 Samuel 20. We kind of dove into it a little bit last week. Got done with 19 sooner than I expected. But as we're getting into this, I had a chance to do a little bit more study on chapter 20. And there's some interesting things here. I noted in chapter 20, verse 1, it says David fled from Naioth. That was that school of the prophets, you'll remember, at Ramah. And he went to Jonathan. He probably fled at the suggestion of Samuel. And it was probably while Saul, the king, was under the influence of the power of God as he lay there prophesying through the night. It was probably then that Samuel said, listen, he knows where you are, you better get moving. And so David left there and went back to Jonathan. And I find it interesting, he's going to Jonathan. Now remember, Jonathan is the oldest son of the king. He is a man who's probably in charge of the army. He's probably the one that gives approval if a man wants to leave military service and go home for a while. If he wants to, and in fact, he might have even been in charge of things like capital punishment if they were neglectful of their duties or something. So David comes back to him and he says, what have I done? What's my crime? How have I wronged your father that he's trying to kill me? Now, when we go back into chapter 19, we remember that first, in the beginning of 19, Saul had told Jonathan and all his attendants to kill David. And so Jonathan warned David, and then he went and he talked to Saul, and Saul changed his mind. He said, no, as surely as the Lord lives, David's not going to be killed, he's going to live. So he'd made that pledge, and so when he sent these guys to David's house, it was obviously something that Jonathan didn't know about. Because when we look in chapter 20, verse 1, or in verse 2 actually, Jonathan says, never, you're not going to die. My father doesn't do anything great or small without letting me know. Why would he hide this from me? Jonathan, with all the other good things about Jonathan, one of the other really neat things about Jonathan is the faith that he has in his father. Even though his father had lost faith in God, he's still doing his best as a son to believe in his father. And so he's like, no, Dad's not going to do anything. And he's remembering the promise that Saul had made in the other chapter, the previous chapter, chapter 19. David's trying to help Jonathan to understand how serious this is. And he says, listen, Dad knows, your dad knows, that you and I, we're good friends. I've found favor in your eyes. And he has told himself, I can't let Jonathan know about this. But listen, I'm telling you, as surely as God lives, I'm just a step away from death. I'm just one step away from death. So Jonathan says to David, whatever you want me to do, I'll do. Now, there's a couple of things as I was looking at this. I saw some things and I thought, you know what, I just got to bring that out. Jonathan and David were very good friends. And so I was trying to think, okay, what kind of lessons can I learn from this? And I'm looking at this whole story of them meeting and talking, and he goes and tries to set things up to make sure that David's going to be okay. And I thought, wait a minute, there's a lot of characteristics about friends and friendship in this chapter. So I want to highlight just a few of those things to you as we're going through here. In verse 1, I think I can see that a friend is someone you can go to when you're in trouble. How many of you have a good friend? You know somebody who's a good friend. Can you go to them when you're in trouble? Yeah, that's what a friend's all about. David's in trouble. He thinks he's about to die. Who does he go to? He goes to his friend Jonathan. Now remember, as I've told you before, Jonathan's probably anywhere from 20, maybe even 30 years older than David. But he was a true friend, a genuine friend. And a friend is somebody you can go to when you're in trouble. And he goes right to Jonathan and he says, listen, Dad's trying to kill me. He's at it again. Secondly, I think a friend is someone you can trust with your deepest fears. Jonathan says, no, David, he's not going to do that. And David says, listen, my life's on the line. I'm going to die. And he's sharing his fears. And Jonathan at first is like, no, David, that's not going to happen. David's like, yeah, it is. I'm telling you, he's trying to kill me. He's sharing his deepest fears. But then Jonathan says, whatever you want me to do, I'll do it. I think a real friend is someone who will do what they can to help you. If you've ever been in a financial situation or in a physical situation, you have friends that will come around you. When I had my surgery back in October, my Bible quiz team, one of the ladies in the Bible quiz team, she's been an assistant, now she's running things now. And she sent me an email and she said, can we stop by? We'd like to bring you dinner. And so around 6:30 or so, then there was a knock on the door, and I was still recovering from surgery. I was kind of bleary in the head, you know, and my wife comes up and she says, they're coming in. I'm thinking, oh, okay. And so 2 of the moms from the quiz team and about 8 of my quizzers all came in, and they had written cards out for me, they had balloons, and they brought food. And it was like, you know, they couldn't heal me, but they could do something. They did what they could do. And a friend is somebody who will do what they can. I think a friend is also somebody who will listen to you even when we get ridiculous. You ever get ridiculous about things? Yeah, I do sometimes.
Yes,
But
Mr. Schaefer.
A friend will listen. And Jonathan is, he says this, David's talking to him. He says, as for you, show kindness to me. This is in verse 8. For you have brought me into a covenant before the Lord with you. If I'm guilty, kill me yourself. Now, isn't that kind of ridiculous? This is his best friend. He's saying to Jonathan, hey, if I'm guilty, kill me. David. And Jonathan's like, no, I would never do that. I would never do that. But David is so upset. He's so frustrated that he's getting a little bit ridiculous. And it doesn't stop here, because he does some other ridiculous things in our storyline tonight. But here's another thing about a friend. A friend is someone you can trust with your life. Jonathan says, I'm going to find out what's going on. I will find out, and I will let you know. You can trust me. Trust me on this. And David felt comfortable trusting his life to his friend. But then later in the story, after he gets word to David that it's not safe, David comes back to him, and Scripture says in verse 41 of chapter 20 that David bowed down before Jonathan 3 times. Now, this is a guy that has a contract out on his life. And if there's one thing you don't do when you know somebody's got a contract on you, is you don't make yourself vulnerable. But David comes back to Jonathan after Jonathan says, hey, listen, I'm sorry, Dad kind of went ballistic on me. Yes, he is trying to kill you. He's gone back on his word. David bows down 3 times. And every time he bowed down, he was vulnerable. But he trusted Jonathan. And so a friend is somebody who you can trust with your life. You can be vulnerable around them, and they don't take advantage of it. Jonathan, though, now let's go back into the story, and we'll get back to some of these other things. So Jonathan is convinced, okay, something's going on. David says, look, here's my plan. Tomorrow is a special feast. I'm supposed to be with the king. Now, I find that kind of interesting. I'm supposed to dine with the king. The king's trying to kill him. The king sent men to his house. They were going to take his bed, take him in his bed, and they were going to kill him in his bed. And now he says, I'm supposed to dine with the king. It makes me wonder what happened between David and Samuel and Saul. Saul had come to the school of the prophets looking for David because he wanted to kill him. But now, I don't know if Saul had a change of heart temporarily while he was there, and he may have said something to somebody like, hey, wow, I just had this experience here at the school of the prophets. I'm not going to kill David. I don't know. But it seems that David was expecting to have to go back there. It was the thing that was expected of him. He was like the fourth most powerful man in the kingdom at that point in time. You had Saul, you had Jonathan, you had Abner, who was the commander of the army, and then there's David. David was number 4 in the kingdom at this point. And so, for whatever reason, he was expected to be with the king, but he says, listen, let me go and hide out till day after tomorrow. If Dad misses me, tell him David wanted to go to Bethlehem. His family wanted this, they were going to have this sacrifice. Now, if you know anything about the Jewish laws or the regulations, you'll know that the only place that they were to have sacrifices was at the tabernacle. But, if you remember, back when we were first getting into 1 Samuel, there was a horrible defeat at a town called Aphek. And during that defeat, which, by the way, let me throw in something that I learned, and that is that according to the Jewish historians who wrote something called the Talmud, which is kind of like a Jewish commentary, but according to the Jewish tradition, the Jewish Talmud, the soldier who was instrumental in winning the battle against Israel and killing both of the priests, Hophni and Phinehas, was none other than Goliath. And so according to Jewish tradition, he was the one that at the Battle of Aphek had killed both of the priests. And so now, not only did that happen, but they also destroyed the place where the tabernacle was. Shiloh was where the tabernacle that had been with Israel as they were traveling through the wilderness, they had come and it had been set up. And it was set up in Shiloh, but the Philistines destroyed Shiloh, and so they had moved what was left of the tabernacle, probably had repaired it, and it was now at a place called Nob. But things weren't going so well. The people of Israel were not supporting the priests like they should have, and there was a lot of poverty among the family of the priests, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. So at any rate, after Shiloh had been destroyed, because there was no place that was really widely accepted as the place to do sacrifices, they would have them sometimes in local areas or like regional areas, and people would all gather. And so it's one of these annual sacrifices that he's talking about. And so, and I find it interesting too that he brings up this idea, and it's unclear in the scripture here whether he actually went to Bethlehem or not. He says, if Dad wants to know where I am, tell him that I begged you to go to Bethlehem. Now, this was logical because Jonathan, as the king's son, was probably the one in charge, as I mentioned to you earlier, with approving the time off for military men and so on. And so he said, just tell Dad I need to go to Bethlehem. Now, it's possible that he did, in fact, go to Bethlehem. And then he came back a couple of days later. That would make what he did here not a lie. But other commentators say, no, he was probably hiding out in some caves. And so this appears to have been a lie. How do you explain that? David is the anointed psalmist of Israel. And he lied. David's human. And I can't excuse it. I won't excuse it. Lying is not right. Although it was, and it has been down through the ages, has been kind of acceptable ethics to lie when it means you would save a life because it's a greater good to save a life than to tell a lie. That's not what Christians believe. We don't believe that lying is ever acceptable. So at any rate, David has either told a lie or he actually left. And so Jonathan goes back and he talks to Dad. And so the day comes, and when you go down to, all the way down to verse 30, the 28 to 30, we've got the actual meal taking place, and Saul doesn't think anything of it that David's not there the first day, because he thinks, oh, he got into something, maybe he came across a dead body or something, he was unclean, so he can't come. But the uncleanness is of the law of Israel and the Mosaic law only lasted for one day. And so when he wasn't there the second day, He's like, Jonathan, where's David? Jonathan gives him the statement that they agreed on, and he gets really upset. And look what he says. He says, don't I know, this is the middle of verse 30, don't I know that you have sided with the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of the mother who bore you? As long as the son of Jesse lives on this earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. Now send someone to bring him to me, for he must die. Saul's a little upset here, because evidently Saul and his men had planned that when David came to the feast, they were going to take him out. And now David's not there. David has avoided this appointment with destiny, if you will, and Saul's really ticked off. Now, but I want you to notice something here. He says, as long as the son of Jesse lives on this earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. Hadn't Samuel already told him that he would not be the king? That his kingdom, his dynasty would not continue? Yes. But when has that stopped Saul? Saul, through most of his kingship, has taken matters into his own hands. And he appears to think that his kingdom is going to continue under his son Jonathan. Now, as I've said before, Jonathan would have made a 20 times better king than what Saul did. Jonathan would have been a fantastic king, but it wasn't God's plan. And so he's really upset about the fact that you are not going to be able to have the kingdom. But watch what happens here. This will show you how insanity is so inconsistent. Jonathan stands up for his friend. Why should he be put to death? What has he done? Saul throws his spear at his own son. So in one moment, he's concerned about his son being able to continue and have the kingdom, and the next minute, he's got the spear and he's trying to pin his own son to the wall. His own flesh and blood, his son that he was his oldest son, the heir apparent to the throne, and here he is trying to kill him. Jonathan is really ticked off, and he gets up from the table in fierce anger. And it says that he didn't even eat at all because he was grieved at his father's shameful treatment of David. That's just, and again, you know, I think one of the things that hurts the most is when you think highly of somebody and then they prove you wrong. And I think all of you have probably experienced that. You believed in somebody, you really put your faith in somebody, and then they, as it were, stabbed you in the back. It's those times when you ask yourself, is it worthwhile to even try to trust? Is it worthwhile to even put faith in people? Jonathan really had stood by his dad. He had told David, no, you know, Dad's not going to do this to you. But now he's really angry, and he just storms out. And so the next morning he activates this plan that he and David had talked about. And it says that Jonathan went out to the field for his meeting with David. Now, what he and David had agreed on was that he would shoot 3 arrows. When he actually does it, he just shoots 1 arrow. Now, one commentator that I read said, well, maybe they're just kind of saying it was 1, but it was really all 3 of them. It seems to me that he's speaking in the singular the whole way. It says that as the boy ran, he shot an arrow beyond him. And when the boy came to the place where Jonathan's arrow had fallen, Jonathan called out, "Isn't the arrow beyond you?" Then he shouted, "Hurry, go quickly, don't stop." The boy comes back, he gives his weapons, and he sends him back to town. So why? Why did they set this method up? When after it's all over, David comes out and they have this, crying fest, and and they say their goodbyes with each other. Why did they do it this other way? Why the arrow thing? Why little secret codes? Because they didn't know if Jonathan would be accompanied by anybody when he came to give the news to David. And so they had it set up so that even if there was a whole group of people there with Jonathan, he could still shoot the arrows and he could give the signal. And if David peeks out from his hiding place across the field there behind this rock, and he sees there's a bunch of people, he knows, oh, gotta go. That's it. I'm on the run. Well, it didn't turn out that way because Jonathan was by himself. And so David comes out of hiding, and it says that he bows down before Jonathan 3 times. They kiss each other and weep. Now listen, don't let anybody tell you that this is proof that homosexuality is smiled upon by the Bible. This was the Near Eastern kiss, which is, and you've seen this with maybe even some Italians, and they kind of grab each other's shoulder on either side of the face. It's a greeting. It's like a hug. It's like a handshake. And that's what happened here. But notice that it says that when they cried, it says that David wept the most. These guys had a connection because of their faith in God, because of their belief in the sovereignty of God and the honor of God. They had a connection that few people have. And now they realize that circumstances are tearing them apart. If you've ever had to say goodbye to a loved one who is very sick, maybe, you parents, when you first took your kids to college and dropped them off, you have a lot to wait for. You look forward to like you drop Wyatt off the first time at college, it's like, my boy's gone out of my life now. It tears your heart out. It's tough. It's rough. It was this kind of a thing that David and Jonathan were feeling because they sensed that this was it. And you know what? This is it, except for one clandestine meeting where Jonathan and David do get together a very short time to get to see each other very briefly a little bit later on. But this is it as far as their friendship, as far as spending time with each other, as far as enjoying each other's company. This is the end. So David now has lost 2 people that meant a bunch to him. He lost his wife Michal, maybe a week, 2 weeks or so before that, maybe even less than that. And now he's losing his good friend Jonathan. And why? Why? All he did was kill a giant and then fight the Lord's battles. He's been going out, he's been being successful and winning against the Philistines. He's done everything right, and now he's lost the 2 most important people in his life. And David realizes something during this time, though, that the longer I live, the more I begin to realize, and I'm sure some of you are way ahead of me, you learned this a long time ago, but David understood the importance of family like he never had before. Because when David started on the run, and especially when we get into chapter 22, we see it, but it's probably already begun here in chapter 21. David is not alone. It looks like he's alone, but some of the things that Jesus tells us later on indicate that at this point, David wasn't alone. He had some family members with him. Definitely later he had family members. He had some loyal men that were by his side. And I'll tell you how I know that. Look at chapter 21, verse 1. David goes to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest. Now Ahimelech is the great-grandson of Eli. Eli was the priest who was there when the Ark of God was captured. He's the one that fell off backward, broke his neck because the Ark of God was captured. His 2 sons were the ones that were killed. So this guy, Ahimelech, is the great-grandson of Eli. And the tabernacle has been relocated to this place called Nob, but it's nowhere near as prestigious as it was at Shiloh, and it's nowhere near as prestigious as the temple is going to be later on. Nob was not very far from Jerusalem. I think I read it was about 10 miles away from Jerusalem. And so when he goes, maybe he's hoping he'll catch Samuel there. I don't know. Maybe he was hoping for a sympathetic ear. He may have even been hoping that the high priest would inquire of God for him. In those days, they had what was called the ephod, E-P-H-O-D. It was a breastplate, and on it were these two things called the Urim and Thummim. It was kind of like a spiritual version of an 8-ball. You know that old thing we used to mess with, you know? Will I ever get married? That remains to be seen. You know, it's like, it was kind of a yes or no kind of thing, but kind of similar to that 8-ball thing in that, you know, it was just something you could do and you'd get an answer. And maybe David was kind of wondering, wow, you know, things are kind of going downhill for me. I thought I was anointed to be the next king. And now I've had to give up my first wife, or my only wife. That's all he knew. He didn't know he was going to have a bunch later on. I had to give up my wife. I had to give up my best friend. I'm running for my life. They're trying to kill me. I haven't done anything wrong. And he may have wanted to inquire of God and say, hey, God, are you still with me? Are you still helping me? And so Ahimelech seems to sense something. It says that he trembled when he met David, and he asks, why are you alone? Why is there no one with you? David answers the priest, the king sent me on a mission, and he said to me, no one is to know anything about the mission I'm sending you on. As for my men, I told them to meet me at a certain place. Now then, what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread, or whatever you can find. Now, had the king sent him on a mission? No, he hadn't. The king hadn't. And so David, even if he didn't lie before about the Bethlehem thing, he lied here. It's not right. But this is one of the reasons why I believe that the Bible's inspired. Because the Bible shows us the good, the bad, and the ugly about the people that the Bible talks about. This was the most honored, respected, and blessed king of Israel. And even to this day, the Jews would tell you that he was the best king that they ever had. And yet, here he is lying. Now, he may not have been lying about the men. And I'll tell you why. Over in, let me see if I can find that verse real quick. There's a verse in, I think it's Mark, where, Mark chapter 2, verses 25 and 26. Jesus says, in talking about the temple and how the Jews are so emphatic about following the Sabbath and honoring the temple that they ignored the needs of people. Okay, you can go ahead and stop that now.